The restaurant shimmered under the glow of midday light. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, scattering across polished glassware and glinting cutlery. To most who sat within its walls, this was a sanctuary of indulgence, where laughter flowed as freely as the wine. Yet among the laughter, one man sat alone at a corner table, a figure almost invisible to the room. His name was Marcus Hale. To the world outside, Marcus was a janitor. His life had been carved out of endless shifts spent cleaning what others discarded, mopping the marble floors of Preston and Cole Industries, scrubbing bathrooms until they shone, carrying bins heavy with crumpled coffee cups and fast food wrappers. His hands were rough, marked by labor that never drew praise. His back carried the weight of long years spent in silence. His clothes, though neatly pressed, were plain. His eyes, though tired, reflected a soul that still carried a flicker of dignity. Marcus had not always walked this path. Years earlier he had dreamed of being an engineer. He had poured himself into his studies, sketching designs and drawing blueprints late into the night. But life's hand was cruel. His father's sudden death left him the sole supporter of his family. Bills arrived faster than opportunities. Books were traded for paychecks. Dreams were traded for survival. What remained was a man who carried quiet resilience, though the world refused to see it. At Preston and Cole, Marcus existed like background music, present but never noticed. Executives strode past him without a glance. Junior staff laughed within earshot as if he were deaf. Some even left messes with a smirk, expecting him to clean without complaint. To many, Marcus was not a man, but a uniform, a mop, a shadow in their glossy offices. It was on one such Friday that the cruel plan was conceived. A handful of junior managers, drunk on arrogance and flushed with wine during their lunch break, devised a scheme that dripped with malice. They would set Marcus up on a blind date. Not as an act of kindness but as a joke. They whispered and laughed, imagining his confusion, his nervousness, his humiliation when he discovered the truth. To them he was nothing but entertainment, a spectacle waiting to unfold. They told him a story. A woman, they said, had been watching him. She admired his kind eyes and his dedication. She wanted to meet him. Marcus, hesitant, found the idea both foreign and intoxicating. His reflection told him otherwise, a man aged by years of struggle with calloused hands and tired lines carved into his face. He had lived alone for so long that even the whisper of companionship seemed like a cruel trick his mind was playing. Yet, against all reason, hope crept into his heart. Perhaps, after all these years, someone had noticed. That night, Marcus ironed his best shirt. It was plain, but he pressed it carefully. Around his wrist, he fastened his old watch, worn but cherished, a gift from his late father. He polished his shoes until they caught the light, though their leather was creased and tired. For once, Marcus looked into the mirror not with defeat, but with a quiet determination. The following afternoon, Marcus entered the restaurant. He had never stepped into such a place on his own before. The air smelled of roasted herbs and expensive wines. The walls were adorned with fine art. Crystal glasses gleamed under the sun. He felt the weight of every eye as he was shown to his table, yet he sat with cautious anticipation, trying not to let the nervous trembling of his hands show. At the other end of the room, the junior managers had already gathered. They leaned close, snickering, whispering to one another while hiding their phones beneath the table, ready to record every moment. Their laughter was sharp, unkind, like knives against glass. They waited for the moment when Marcus' hope would collapse, when his face would reveal the sting of rejection. But fate is often impatient with cruelty. And destiny that day had other plans. When the restaurant doors opened again, Marcus looked up. He froze. Walking toward him was a woman he recognized immediately, though only from a distance. Evelyn Carrington, the CEO of Preston and Cole Industries. The woman who commanded boardrooms, who negotiated million-dollar deals, whose name appeared in magazines as a symbol of success and power. She walked with elegance, her simple navy dress radiating quiet confidence. Her hair was tied back neatly, her posture straight, her presence commanding. Marcus' heart stumbled in his chest. Surely this was a mistake. She could not be walking toward him. Yet her gaze was steady, her steps purposeful. The men in the corner shifted uneasily, their laughter caught in their throats. Evelyn Carrington, the woman they admired, the woman they feared, was not only in the restaurant, but making her way directly to Marcus' table. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Evelyn had already overheard. Moments before she entered, she had passed the junior managers and caught fragments of their laughter. She had learned of the prank. She had been told this gathering was meant as a joke at Marcus' expense. And for a brief moment she could have walked away. She could have ignored it, leaving Marcus to suffer the cruelty in silence. But something within her stirred. Evelyn had grown up in hardship. Her mother had worked endless hours as a housekeeper, bending her back in homes that were not hers, enduring insults from those she served. Evelyn remembered the weary look in her mother's eyes, the quiet strength it took to survive when the world dismissed you as invisible. Now, looking at Marcus, she did not see a janitor. She saw a reflection of that same resilience. The room shifted as Evelyn approached. Conversations faltered. Forks paused midair. The junior managers stared, their smirks vanishing. And Marcus, his hands trembling against the tablecloth, could barely breathe. When Evelyn reached his table, she pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. The clatter of silverware fell silent. The laughter in the corner dissolved into unease. Marcus blinked, stammering, his voice almost breaking as he asked if she was truly there for him. Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes steady and kind, and replied, "Yes." In that moment the restaurant changed. The joke was no longer on Marcus. It was on those who had planned his humiliation. The silence inside the restaurant thickened. Every person present could feel it, like a weight pressing down on the air. The junior managers who had schemed so arrogantly moments earlier now sat stiff in their seats. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by nervous glances that darted between one another, searching for some way to reclaim control of the moment. But it was too late. Evelyn Carrington, the CEO of Preston and Cole Industries, had chosen her place at Marcus Hale's table. And by doing so, she had transformed their prank into something none of them had foreseen. Marcus struggled to steady himself. His throat tightened as he stared at the most powerful woman in the company he worked for, the company where he was invisible, the company where his life had been reduced to quiet labor. "Are you sure?" he whispered, almost afraid to speak the words aloud. His voice trembled with disbelief. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "I am very sure," she replied gently. "And I am here for you." Those words struck Marcus like a chord that had been waiting for years to be played. He felt his chest rise, a breath caught somewhere between relief and astonishment. For a man who had long accepted invisibility, being seen in that moment felt like standing in sunlight after decades of shadow. The junior managers shifted uneasily in their corner. Their plan, carefully crafted for cruelty, had dissolved into something they could not control. The room that had once felt like a stage for their mockery had become a courtroom of sorts, and their guilt was evident in every twitch of their eyes, every unfinished sip of wine. The waiter approached nervously, placing menus in front of Evelyn and Marcus. Evelyn's tone was calm, collected, but firm when she said, "We'll take our time." It was not a request, it was a declaration that this table, this moment, mattered. Marcus held the menu but hardly saw the words printed on it. His mind was a storm. Why had she sat with him? Why had she chosen to intervene? Surely, she had better things to do than sit across from a janitor who had been lured into humiliation. Evelyn sensed his unease. She rested her hands gently on the table, her posture open and unguarded. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying not only authority but also warmth, "I overheard what those men were planning. They thought they could make you a spectacle. They thought your worth could be reduced to a joke." Marcus lowered his gaze, ashamed. He wanted to disappear, to retreat into the comfort of invisibility rather than face the sting of pity. But Evelyn's voice pressed on, unwavering. "They were wrong," she continued. "Terribly wrong. Because what they see as weakness, I see as strength. What they dismiss, I respect." Marcus blinked, stunned by her words. No one had ever spoken to him this way, certainly not someone like her, someone who occupied the highest office, whose decisions shaped the company he quietly served. "You may not realize it," Evelyn said, her eyes softening, "but men like you keep the world standing. People think progress comes from boardrooms and deals, but I know better. I grew up with someone just like you. My mother was a housekeeper. She spent her life cleaning homes she could never afford to live in. She was laughed at, ignored, treated as if she were invisible. But she was the strongest woman I have ever known. Her dignity, her perseverance, her quiet sacrifices, they built the foundation of who I am." Marcus' eyes burned as he listened. Memories of his own sacrifices rose within him, his father's sudden death, the crushing bills that ended his education, the years of labor that stripped away his youth but not his heart. For once, someone was not dismissing those sacrifices. For once, someone saw them for what they truly were. The restaurant listened in silence. Strangers leaned ever so slightly in their chairs, drawn to the gravity of Evelyn's words. The junior managers shrank further into their seats, their wine untouched, their faces pale with shame. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand steady though she did not touch his. "You are not invisible, Marcus," she said firmly. "Not today. Not in my presence. And not ever again if I have anything to say about it." For the first time in years, Marcus felt the tightness in his chest loosen. He drew a long breath, his eyes brimming with tears that he could no longer contain. His voice broke when he whispered, why would you do this for me?" Evelyn's expression softened. "Because I know what it feels like to be unseen. And because no human being deserves to be humiliated for the amusement of others. You deserve dignity, Marcus. You always did." The words hung in the air like a judgment, and their power was undeniable. Around the restaurant the atmosphere shifted. Conversations that had once bubbled with careless laughter were hushed now, subdued by the quiet authority of Evelyn's declaration. Even those who had no part in the prank felt the weight of the lesson pressing upon their hearts. The meal itself became almost secondary. The plates arrived, but few noticed the taste of what was served. What mattered were the words exchanged across that table. Evelyn asked Marcus about his life, about his dreams. She listened, truly listened, as he spoke haltingly about his past, about his abandoned studies in engineering, about the crushing responsibilities that had left him with little choice but to trade ambition for survival. And when he faltered, when his voice dipped into the shadows of regret, Evelyn reminded him that his worth was not defined by the job he held but by the strength with which he had endured. The junior managers sat in silence, each word like a mirror reflecting their cruelty back upon them. The laughter they had hoped for never came. Instead, shame dug into their chests, deeper than any reprimand could have done. They were forced to watch as the man they had sought to ridicule was elevated in the eyes of everyone present, while they themselves diminished into nothing more than symbols of arrogance and pettiness. By the time the plates were cleared, the lesson had been etched into every heart in that room. Marcus was no longer the janitor in their eyes. He was a man whose quiet dignity had been honored in the most unexpected of ways. Evelyn's final words before leaving the restaurant rang like a bell. Never forget that the worth of a person is not measured by their title, but by their character. And as she rose, the room rose with her, not in applause, not in ceremony, but in silence so profound that it carried more respect than any cheer could. Marcus sat still, tears lingering in his eyes, overwhelmed by what had unfolded. He had arrived expecting humiliation. Instead he had found dignity restored. Monday morning carried a different weight for Marcus Hale. He rose earlier than usual, though sleep had been light. The memory of Saturday lingered in his mind, a memory that replayed again and again, the CO sitting across from him, her words ringing with truth, the silence that had swallowed the restaurant whole, and the shame that fell upon those who had plotted against him. 4 years, Marcus had walked the halls of Preston and Cole as if cloaked in invisibility. His mop and bucket were his only companions, and though hundreds passed him daily, few ever truly saw him. But this Monday, as he pushed open the glass doors of the towering office building, something felt different. The air itself seemed to shift as heads turned, whispers spread, and the weight of unseen eyes followed him through the lobby. At first, he feared it was mockery, that the prank had somehow spread, that the humiliation he had been spared in the restaurant had simply been delayed. But then it came the first nod of respect. It was a young receptionist, someone who had passed Marcus 100 times without acknowledgement. She looked him in the eye, offered a small but genuine smile and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hale." Mr. Hale. Marcus nearly stumbled at the sound. Never before had anyone in this building added such weight to his name. He moved through the halls, his cart rattling softly across the polished floors. More faces turned toward him. Some greeted him quietly, some nodded, some even looked apologetic. The whispers were not cruel. They were curious, respectful. Word of what had happened had spread faster than Marcus could have imagined. The story of the prank, the CEO's intervention, and the transformation of that humiliating setup into a moment of redemption had traveled from desk to desk, office to office. When he reached the executive floor, the stares were more cautious. A few of the junior managers who had orchestrated the prank avoided his eyes, pretending to shuffle papers or check their phones. Their faces were pale, their arrogance stripped away. The memory of Evelyn Carrington's words still burned in them, exposing their cruelty for what it was. Marcus said nothing to them. He simply continued his work. Yet in his silence was a strength greater than rebuke. They felt it heavy as a shadow. At lunch, he sat alone in the break room as he always had. But today the silence was different. Instead of being ignored, he was noticed. A man from accounting paused, hesitated, and then asked if Marcus would like to join him and his colleagues. A woman from Human Resources stopped to thank him for the years he had quietly served, admitting she had never realized how much he carried on his shoulders. For Marcus, every word was overwhelming. To be seen after years of invisibility felt like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime of darkness. He responded humbly, quietly, still uncertain how to bear so much sudden recognition. That evening when he returned home to his small apartment, Marcus sat by the window and let the city lights wash over him. He thought of Evelyn Carrington. He thought of her voice, steady and unwavering, defending him in front of all. He thought of how she had not only seen him, but lifted him from the shadows with words that had restored his dignity. He whispered a prayer of gratitude. For years, he had carried burdens in silence, never expecting the world to notice. And yet, in one afternoon, the course of his life had shifted. Meanwhile, within Preston and Cole, the incident became more than just a whispered story. It became a lesson. Executives spoke quietly in corridors about what had happened. Departments repeated the story in fragments. How the CEO had sat with a janitor, how she had spoken of dignity and unseen worth, how she had silenced arrogance with kindness. The junior managers who had engineered the prank faced the sting of shame daily. Evelyn had not fired them immediately. She could have. But instead, she chose something more enduring. To let them live with the weight of their actions, to let them feel the loss of respect in every glance from their colleagues. No reprimand could have been as punishing as the knowledge that their cruelty had exposed their character. Evelyn herself moved through the office as she always had, calm, graceful, commanding. But there was a new edge to the respect she commanded. She had always been admired for her success, her decisiveness, her ability to lead. Now she was respected for something deeper, her humanity. She had shown that true leadership was not only about profit margins and deals, but about the courage to defend dignity when it mattered most. Marcus noticed the changes in subtle ways. People no longer left careless messes behind. Doors were held open for him. Colleagues paused to greet him. Some offered apologies, awkward but sincere. The very air seemed lighter, as if Evelyn's single act of compassion had rippled through the walls of Preston and Cole, reshaping its culture. Still, Marcus remained humble. He did not carry himself as though elevated above others. He carried himself the same way he always had, quietly, steadily, with dignity. Yet within him was a spark that had not been there before. A sense of worth, of being seen. One evening, as he finished wiping down the marble floors of the executive wing, Marcus paused at the large glass window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered with lights. He thought of the years he had spent dreaming of being an engineer, of the nights spent drawing blueprints by the dim glow of a lamp. Regret tugged at him, but Evelyn's words returned, steadying him. Your worth is not defined by your title but by your character. For the first time, Marcus believed it. The weeks passed, and the story continued to spread beyond the company walls. Vendors whispered it to one another. Business partners repeated it during lunches. The story of a janitor, a cruel prank, and a CEO's intervention became more than gossip. It became a parable. A reminder that humanity is built not by status but by kindness. Marcus never sought the attention. He never courted recognition. Yet he could not deny the way it reshaped his life. He no longer walked unseen. He no longer felt like a shadow among the towering walls of Preston and Cole. He was Marcus Hale, a man who had endured hardship, who had been tested by cruelty, and who had discovered that dignity, once restored, could never again be taken away. And though he returned home each night to the same small apartment, the same quiet space, he carried within him something new, the knowledge that the world had looked upon him and found value. Time has a way of polishing certain moments until they shine brighter than all the others. For Marcus Hale, that afternoon in the restaurant remained etched in his soul, not as a memory of humiliation, but as the turning point of his life. The weeks that followed did not transform him into a wealthy man, nor did they erase the calluses from his hands. Marcus still rose early, still mopped floors, still emptied trash cans. Yet everything was different. Where once there had been silence, now there was acknowledgement. Where once his footsteps echoed alone, now they were met with greetings. Evelyn Carrington did not allow the story to fade. At a quarterly meeting, she spoke not of profits or market growth but of dignity. She reminded every employee, from executives to interns, that the worth of a company was measured not by its wealth, but by the respect it showed to every individual under its roof. The story of Marcus became a cornerstone of that message. And in the eyes of many, Marcus ceased to be a janitor. He became a symbol of quiet strength, of resilience, of humanity that refused to be erased. The junior managers never escaped the shadow of their actions. Though they remained employed, the shame they carried was evident in every interaction. No one laughed at their jokes anymore. Their arrogance had been stripped away. They became the cautionary example, while Marcus became the lesson. Yet Marcus himself never boasted, never flaunted what had happened. He continued his work with humility, knowing that the truest dignity was not loud but steady. Evelyn, from her office high above the city, would sometimes glance down at the lobby where Marcus passed. And though their lives were separated by titles and responsibilities, both knew they were bound by that afternoon, by a shared understanding of what it meant to be unseen, and what it meant to be recognized. Years later, long after the story had been retold countless times, Marcus would sit by his window and think of his father's old watch, the one he had worn that day. He would remember Evelyn's steady eyes, her unwavering words. And he would smile, knowing that the prank meant to destroy him had instead revealed a truth stronger than cruelty. That the soul of a person cannot be measured in wealth or titles. That kindness has the power to silence arrogance. And that dignity, once defended, can change not only a man's life, but the hearts of everyone who witnesses it. The story of a janitor and a CEO did not end as a joke. It endured as a reminder that to truly see another human being is the greatest act of leadership, and the deepest form of respect.